blockchain architecture. And now I request Kalimuthu to give an introduction about this speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. So now we have the section on blockchain architecture by Mr. T. Praveen. Praveen is currently working as an applied scientist in artificial intelligence and data science engineering at Acera Incorporation USA. He has completed his master's degree in computer science from University of Texas, where he was also working as a researcher in developing deep learning algorithm to solving challenging NLP problems. He also holds a BTech degree in computer science engineering from NIT Puducherry. His primary research includes artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer networking, cryptography, and blockchain. And he has published and presented various research articles at national and international conference on these research areas. He has good industrial experience also with academic research. He was working with Fortune 500 companies like Verson, where he was a senior data scientist responsible for solving problem using machine learning and data science technology. Now, without any delay, now I requested to Mr. T. Praveen to take the session. Please, sir.
Yeah. Hi, participants. Good evening. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sure. Let me share my screen. So we'll be looking at blockchain architectures today. Yeah. So before blockchain architecture, right? Let's go over this technology, blockchain. What exactly is blockchain? Why blockchain now? And what kind of impact it's having on society? What kind of technological impacts it's having? So we'll be going over that first before discussing the blockchain architecture, right? So let's think about the current technology which we have, right, or in the past years. Let's think about internet. Now internet was supposed to be free, and it was supposed to be decentralized and distributed. But right now what's happening is the big tech giants, right, it's controlling the internet all over. So anything you do in internet, it goes through either Google, Amazon, or all the big companies. So there is a centralized control of the data flow with these companies, right? Which creates trust issues. That is one major disadvantage which we are having right now. Second, let's think about let's take this problem, right? Let's take this banking problem. Suppose I from here in USA, I want to do some kind of transaction and send some amount of money to India, where I belong, right? So in that case, what happens is the money, it goes through series of banks, right? It goes through multiple US banks, and then it goes through then it reaches the Indian bank, and then it goes to a particular bank account, right? In this process, there are series of transaction which is involved, and there is a transaction fees, right? And in fact, the bank controls this transaction. In fact, bank would have your personal data, like so let's say Praveen sends some $200 to his friend, right? In that case, bank would mandate this or have all this data with itself. So it would be able to see your data, the kind of transaction you're making, and all your personal details, right? Apart from that. So that's not the only disadvantage. The second thing is that there would be some kind of transaction fees, right, which these banks would take, right? Apart from that, there is some kind of delay which occurs. So it's not instant. It takes at least 24 hours to send money from here in US to India, right? And if you want to do it faster, right, within 1 or 2 hours, then you'll have to pay much more transaction fees, right? That's how the current banking system works. And these are the disadvantages with the traditional banking system. Let's take this example, another example, right? Let's take this example of document processing. Let's say think like there are two people who want to share some kind of documents, right? Earlier, how we used to do is, like, I would create a document and I'll do some kind of modification, and if I want my friend to process the document, I'll share it with him, and he modifies it, and he'll share it with me. So simultaneous updates were not possible at that time, right? Traditionally. Now, think about technologies like Google Doc, right? Here we are able to do simultaneous updates. Though we are able to do simultaneous updates, still it's centralized. By centralized, what I mean is like it's controlled by some entity, right? It's controlled by Google, right? And what, so in case of network failures, or in some cases, right, there is high chance that we would not be able to use that document, right? So these are the cases, right? These are the problems which we have in current systems, right? So blockchain basically addresses these kind of problems. So let's say here a person, right, Alice, he wants to send some document to Bob, right? So here it goes to, traditionally it goes to a centralized server or a distributed server, which is again controlled by an entity, which could be Google or whatever the company which allows you to use that service, right? And then it basically allows you to send a document. So the idea of blockchain technology is to create a decentralized system here. The network here in center, it needs to be decentralized, and to maintain consistency along with the decentralized capacity. So like I've said, there are advantages for this, right? Like, because it completely cuts the middleman. It is faster. It increases trust amongst the processing. So there are a lot of advantages. So blockchain basically helps in building a network here, which is decentralized, right? So these are some different definitions of blockchain which are widely used. It says this decentralized database system with strong consistency support. So it's like a database. It's like it stores your historical information, and it's consistent. Like you, multiple entities using the network would be able to use or view that data at that point of time, and it is consistent for all the entities in the network, right? Second, you see the second definition. It says decentralized computation and information sharing platform that enables multiple authoritative domains. So let's take authoritative domains, right? So this is a very important term. So by authoritative domains, what I mean is, let's say I have to transact some kind of money from US to India, right? US bank would have separate kind of protocols, and they might not be very comfortable with sharing certain kind of personal details with Indian banks, right? In the same case with Indian banks, right? Indian banks might have certain kind of protocols which they might keep it secret, right? So both of these are authoritative entities, right? Now, how do we enable efficient sharing of information amongst these authoritative domains in a trustworthy manner? So that's what this definition points out. Like who do not trust each other to cooperate, coordinate, and collaborate in the rational decision making process. So this is one good definition. The third definition is it's involved. So what this definition says is a blockchain is an open distributed ledger. So I marked this term open. So this is by Lakhani. This is by a scientist at Lakhani. He published a paper at Harvard Business Review. So this is a definition according to him. So what he says is, blockchain is an open distributed ledger that records transaction between two parties efficiently in a verifiable and a permanent way. What it means is, let's say there are two parties, right? And that the transaction should be open. By open, it means like we should be able to, like every party in the network should be able to see that see or view or understand that transaction is fair. Distributed ledger is considered ledger as some kind of a database, right? Let's say I'm doing some kind of transaction. Let's say I have initially $10 in my account. Now I transfer the $10 to my friend, and then he transfers this $10 to his own friend. So all these transactions are saved, right? Consider these data saved in a particular database. So consider it as a distributed ledger, as a database which is distributed, and multiple parties, whatever they do, whatever transaction they do, it gets stored in this distributed ledgers, and we should be able to efficiently verify it. By verification, I mean like we should be able, there should be a way to make or verify if these steps or transactions which we are doing are correct, right? Let's say I only have $10 in my account, and if I am trying to transfer $20, that's not a correct transaction, right? It should be able to efficiently verify. So that's these are the definition of blockchain, right? According to this. So let's go over the major properties or what properties of blockchain are creating importance to the business. And apart from that, we'll be looking into what all business areas it's transforming, right? Let's look at the properties of blockchain. So blockchain it says immutability. So by immutability, what it means, like whenever we do some kind of transactions, these transactions are stored in a database. In blockchain terms, it's called public ledger. So each transaction or each data is stored in public ledger, and this public ledger is immutable. Immutable is, it's like we should, no one should be able to tamper the data, right? It should not, we should not be able to modify or alter, or any parties involved in the network should not be able to modify or tamper that data. So that is a very important property. It is very important because any series of transactions, right, what we do, if we are able to alter it, right, it's like kind of an attack, and that spoils all this consistency protocol. So immutability is one of the very important properties. Second goes transparency. So by transparency, what it means is every business should be able to track the system details. Like, let's say I do some kind of transaction, right? I should be able to track, okay, how much money I'm transferring to my friend and how much money he is transferring to his friend, right? So all these data should be transparent. Efficient, by efficiency I mean like we should be able to do it faster, do it cost efficient, and in fact efficiency in all way. So basically in efficiency means like we should be able to process transaction faster. It should be able to basically eliminate all the high cost or middleman cost associated with the transactions. By traceability, we mean we should be able to verify or trace at what point of time a specific transaction has been done. So this basically prevents frauds, right? Let's say if I have each and every transaction details, which is immutable, and with that, right, we can easily trace like if there is a fraudulent transaction in the series of transactions, right? And the fifth property is security, right? By security, you mean like, let's say two parties are contacting or two parties are interacting in a network, in a blockchain network, or in any kind of network, right? It should be secure. Like let's say if I send some kind of data to my friend, it should be secure. Like an attacker should not be able to go tamper that data. He should not be able to view that data. So that basically the data transfer in and around the network should be secure. And blockchain basically uses a lot of cryptographic algorithms and methods to maintain security in the network, right? Let's look at major impact areas where blockchain is creating a lot of values. So these are the different areas where blockchain are creating most important values right now. So finance, we are all aware of the cryptocurrency, right? So they're trying to basically decentralize the banking system. Apart from that, there are other areas in finance which like investment and all those things, right? Investment management, like let's say there is a company who funds, like the company wants some kind of products. So what the company would do is it will go fund the small startups, so the startups would try to develop the products according to their idea, and they would basically deliver the product. Now think about this basic use case, right? Let's say there are n companies who are ready to fund for to get a specific task done, and there are other set of companies who are ready to basically do the task, develop the product, and then deliver the product and use this fund, right? In that case, this technology, what it does is there's something called smart contracts. By smart contracts, what it means is it ensures trust. So whenever these parties send money, it is not immediately delivered to the client. It is basically held out, and once the product is delivered, then the money gets transferred. So there are different rules by which we can write smart contracts. So this is just one simple use case, right? So apart from that, these smart contracts are also used in supply chain cases, basically to move goods around, right? Let's say a company like Amazon, right? Let's say I'm ordering a product from one location to another location. There are a series of supply chain involved. So first the order goes an order is created, and once the order is created, it is distributed to the different vendors, and then vendors would process the order, get that product done. Once it's done, it goes to a delivery person, and then it gets delivered, right? So in this series of process, each of these intermediate levels would incur, like they would want some kind of commission or some kind of cost, right? Now let's say, so Amazon is a well-established company, right? We'll be comfortable in ordering any product and spending the money ahead. Let's say there is some other company XYZ which is very new, and we want to, so we would definitely not be willing to spend or order some new products in that company, right? So these kind of blockchain technology, what it does is it basically creates a smart agreement. Like whenever you order it, until the product is not delivered to you, the money gets stuck at each of these different levels, at vendor level, delivery level, right? So this ensures basically trust within the system. In healthcare, there are different areas. Like there is something called pharmaceutical supply chain or drug traceability. So by drug traceability, I mean it's a process of identifying the originality and legitimacy of the product, right? A medical product, and you should be able to track where the product was created, what components, and it's like kind of a supply chain area. There's something called patient consent management in healthcare. So what they do in patient consent management is it refers to system of practices that dictate how consumers and patients allow which personal health information they are willing to access or share with the health providers, right? So it is a very good area where blockchain is really transforming. If you come to retail, again, retail inventory management, right, is one of the major areas where blockchain is used. Let's think about government. Government is like very interesting. So let's think about the current voting system. Like so, if you think about the voting system, right, the electronic machines, there is a central point of failure. Like let's say we all vote to the system, and since it is controlled by an entity or government, right, there is a chance that government may control. There is a chance that data might get lost. There is a chance that data could get tampered, right? What if we use completely a blockchain based architecture for this voting system, right? In that case, each of these transactions, right, would be recorded in this public ledger, and with this capacity of with all these features, it would be very difficult to modify or tamper the voting system, right? So these are the major areas in which blockchain is impacting. Apart from this, there are different gray areas. Like so here in Silicon Valley, what they do is like it's called AI. They combine AI and blockchain to solve various problems. So we can discuss about that later. So these are the main areas in which blockchain is used, and it's being used widely, and it's being adopted. So before looking at blockchain, so what are the prerequisites? Like, so mostly blockchain, mostly around 80%, it uses concepts of distributed systems and cryptography to develop this architecture, right? So let's go over the system architecture. So as discussed, so we have three different kind of architectures. If we look at the system architectures, right, in blockchain domain, right, there is normally there is a centralized architecture in which there is a central point of failure. This is how traditional client server architecture works, right? We have a software, and then there is some service which is exposed from the server. So if you want to use that service, right, we just you pay some kind of cost and use that service, right? There is one server which controls everything. So it's kind of a centralized system, right? Like consider this this is a server in which all these client interacts with this specific server. So let's think about the problems with this system, right? Single point of failure. Let's say what happens if this server fails? This complete network would be down, right? It's very bad for business. Security and trust issues. Again, there is a chance that your data or whatever you're using to consume the service, they might misuse it, right? And there is again a scalability issues. What if suppose we have initially 1,000 clients? What if it becomes 10,000 clients? How are we going to scale, right, with a single server? So it's not horizontally scalable. So it's vertically scalable. By vertical scalability, what I mean is you could try basically increasing the RAM, increasing the hardware, right? but still, at a point, it will not be in a state to basically handle the amount of traffic, right? So these are the basic disadvantages. Apart from that, you might lose network connections, and there could be a abrupt failure. Like, consider system like this, right? What happens if like there is a chance that it could suddenly fail? And that, right, it's not even a gradual failure, it's just a sudden failure and all the data is lost, right? And maintenance might create a bad customer experience, because whenever you want to change something, you have to turn down the server, and then it might create a lot of issues. So a lot of issues with this single point based system, right? So from centralized system, we move to a decentralized system. So by decentralized system, what it does is, instead of having a single central owner, right, it has multiple owners or multiple servers. So it eliminates the single point of failure issue which we talked about. But so the multiple owners will have multiple copy of the data or multiple copy of the service, whatever it needs to be served, right? So in this case also, there is a chance like this node could fail. What happens like if this node fails, right? Still, this could so all these connected client, basically using the metadata information, they could query and get the service from a different central node, right? So this eliminates all the disadvantages of centralized system. Basically, the disadvantages here for this system is, it is little difficult to set up, and there is some amount of cost involved, right? And how do I communicate with different central servers, right, or central owners, right? In that case, managing communications conflicts are difficult. Now this is very interesting. So there is a difference between decentralized and distributed architecture, which is not very obvious. So let's look into this. Distributed basically means a system in which computation is distributed across components. So let's say I have a task, right? I have some kind of problem to solve. But what distributed would do is, it will basically split the task, complete the task, and then it would get me the result, right? So here it can be distributed across multiple components, across multiple geographic locations. So it works based on message passing, right? Let's say there are 5 different nodes doing 5 different parts of or components of my task, right? When the first node completes the task, it would send message that, okay, I like the status is completed, right? And when the second node completes the task, it will send a separate status. So based on this status, right, the system basically decides, okay, I have completed like the task has been completed. Now let's think about the difference between distributed and decentralized, right? Distribution basically refers to differences of location, whereas centralization and decentralization refers to level of control. So this is a major difference. It's like we will be going over the examples to concretely understand this concept. So decentralized basically means where components, like there are components in network, they have capacity to operate on local information and accomplish the goal, rather than central ordering or influence. When there is no authority or no central entity controlling your network, and and each entities or each part of node in the network is capable of working on some kind of information, right? It's called a decentralized system. But distributed system is the task gets splitted and completed at multiple levels, but there is a controlling authority, right? So that's the basic difference between the decentralized and distributed. So this is more of a decision locality. Now again, this decentralized system we can categorize them as like the nodes in the decentralized system could be peer-to-peer or master-slave, right? So by peer-to-peer, we mean systems in which or all the network or nodes will have equal privilege, right? They have all they work collaboratively to accomplish a single goal. And in case of master-slave architecture, what they do is there are different nodes. It is not a single point of failure. What happens in this kind of master-slave within distributed decentralized system is, all the remaining nodes would basically elect a leader or elect a master based on some kind of voting technique, and this master would basically delegate and get the task done. Now what happens if the master fails? if the master fails, there is a secondary master, a secondary name node, which basically has the metadata information, like the point in time snapshot is what they say. Like at each timestamp, it will have the metadata information. So based on that, the secondary master would become the primary master, right? And there would be another secondary master assigned. So here there is no one controlling it. Basically, the system automatically decides and does the task, right? So here, so these are the differences between system architecture. I know this is confusing. Let's go over a simple example to understand these architectural designs, right? Let's consider this example. Let's say centralized and non-distributed system. Consider processing a Word document application on your PC, right? So you are using a Microsoft Word application on your personal computer. So what happens is one entity, Microsoft, controls your application and operating system, right? So there is some amount of control, which means it is centralized, right? And both your applications are running on your PC, and it's not running anywhere else apart from your physical location. So it's non-distributed. So this architectural pattern is centralized and non-distributed. Let's look at decentralized and non-distributed, right? Let's say consider you're using an open source system like Linux, right? With an open source word processing software. Don't consider something like a processing software which is not developed by Microsoft, right? It is developed by an open source community. You're using an open source OS with open source developed word processing system. In this case, if you look very closely, right, what happens is there are different people and organizations who contribute to these items. So it is not a single point of control, right? So the control is with the open source community, like a lot of people, a lot of organization which develops Linux, which develops this word processing system. So thus it is decentralized. There is no one has like the power, right? Like there is no central authority here. It's by group of people. And on the other hand, it just runs on your PC, right? So which is non-distributed. So this is decentralized and non-distributed architecture. Let's go over centralized and distributed architecture. So consider cloud service provider, right? Like let's say AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, right? In that you can do a lot of things, right? You can basically push a lot of data. You could do a lot of transaction. You could do heavy processing, which is again distributed across multiple servers in various geographical locations, and it gets your task done, right? So this is distributed, but it is not decentralized because this is controlled by a service provider, which is Amazon or Google or whatever the service provider is, right? Now let's think about decentralized and distributed. A good example here is Bitcoin. So if we closely look at the Bitcoin architecture, right? Bitcoin basically uses a blockchain system that cannot be altered by one entity. Like no one person has single control over the systems or different nodes in the network, and it also runs on a peer-to-peer independent computer spread across the globe. So it's distributed, right? So these are the major differences between different architectural patterns. So any questions till now? I'll pause for a minute or so. So no questions. Okay, let's move on. Okay, let's go over the prerequisites, right? Like I told, like there are two main prerequisites, right? Distributed system and cryptography. So we have discussed over the distributed system architecture, which are these centralized, non-distributed, distributed, all these architectural patterns. Now we'll go over cryptography, right? So let's look at any network, not blockchain network. Like let's look at simple network or concerns with any network, right? So in any network, when we are doing any kind of transaction, we have to maintain all these properties, right? The data sharing should be confidential. Like whenever you want to share, like, or we want to share some kind of data, we don't want some kind of attacker or third person to view that data. Integrity is when, let's say, a person A sends a message to B, there should not an attacker or a person C should not be able to view the data and change the data, right? The data tampering should not be able to happen. That's the case of integrity. Non-repudiation is, let's say, A sends some kind of data to B. At some later point of time, A should not deny that I have not sent some data to B, right? It should not basically non-repute. And authentication, by authentication, what it means is when B receives a message from A, it should be able to verify that, okay, this message is received from A. All right. So to maintain, so these properties are important for any network, be it blockchain network, normal, whatever is right now, right, in web, right. So the solution here, which is used in blockchain, is cryptography, right. So cryptography, we use encryption on data based on keys. Now it's divided into two broad fields: symmetric key and asymmetric key cryptography. Symmetric key, we use only one key to basically encrypt and decrypt the data, let's say. And asymmetric key, we use two keys, one public key and a private key. Let's see how we encrypt the database using these concepts, right? So this is a public key or a symmetric key cryptography, cryptographic framework. Let's say the first system wants to transfer some kind of data to the second system, right? Both will have a common key, and basically this will encrypt the data using the key, and we generate the ciphertext. Once the ciphertext goes over the network and reaches the destination, right, it will use the same key to decrypt the message. So there are problems with this system, right? So what the major problem with this system is, let's say there is another system, say X, right? In that case, this system cannot use the same key. It should use a different keys. So as the system grows, as the number of components in the network grows, right, the number of keys increases, and managing key is a problem. And also there could be like a lot of chances of attacking, because we are using same key on both ends, right? If you get compromised and like on one end, it's like getting compromised on other end too. So that's the major disadvantage of public key or symmetric key cryptography, right? Let's think about asymmetric key cryptography. What happens in asymmetric key cryptography is this. Let's look at this. So a client, let's say A wants to send some message to B, right? Each A and B has two keys, one public key and one private key. B will also have one public key and one private key. Public key is public, which means all the parties in the network would be able to view the A's or B's public key or any other node's public key. But private key is no nodes or no other entity would not be able to view the private key. It is kept secret to that specific node. So in this asymmetric key cryptography, what happens is what it does, it encrypts a message using B's public key, which is visible to A, right? Like since public key is public, A would be able to view that B's public key. So what A would do is A would take B's public key, encrypt the data, and convert it into ciphertext, and it would pass that ciphertext to B. Once it reaches B, B will use its private key to decrypt and read this message, right? So this is the kind of encryption which is done in asymmetric key cryptography. So this ensures confidentiality and also integrity here. So this ensures confidentiality and integrity. What about non-repudiation and authenticity, right? We should be able to verify that this message is only from A and not other entity, right? In that case, there is a concept of digital signatures. We'll look at how digital signature is done. So whenever A sends a message, it takes the message, it uses its private key to do some kind of an encryption and just append it to the message, right? And once this message reaches B, B is able to view A's public key, right? With A's public key, it will be able to verify that if this message was encrypted using A's private key, because there is a relation between A's private key and public key, right? So this concept is called digital signatures. Which is like, with this, it will be able to verify that this message has been sent from A, because there is some kind of an encryption which is readable or which is able to decipher using A's public key, right? So that's the concept of digital signatures here. Overall, this is how asymmetric key cryptography is done. Like, let's say this system wants to send some kind of message to the second system, right? It will take the message, it will use its private key, which is just to sign that, okay, I am A and I am going to sign this document that I am sending it to you. So it will use its private key to just encrypt some part, and then it will use B's public key to encrypt and convert it into ciphertext. Once it reaches, B will use its private key to decrypt the message, and then it will use A's public key to validate that if it has come from A, if the message is really come from A. So this is how asymmetric key cryptography works. So we will be discussing about blockchain architectures, like each of the components of blockchain architecture and how it will be built. So far, any questions on cryptographic ideas or the distributed architecture ideas? Like you could question me.
Yes, sir. I have a doubt.
Yeah.
See, for example, you were discussing about the cryptography, private key and public key. So, for example, like if a bank sends a statement, like monthly statement, which is encrypted with a password.
Okay.
It is sent through email to the user, and the user validates with his own password, whatever given in the narration. So, which category does it fall in this diagram?
Can you repeat it? Like I didn't get the.
No, for example, if the bank wishes to send a personal account statement to one of its customers,
Okay.
through an email, and the narration for a description for the password is given in the email only.
Oh, okay. So
with the password, the customer accesses the details.
Yes, that's true. So that basically comes under the symmetric key, because what happens is banks would have your information, right? Let's say my name is Praveen and my date of birth is something, right? So they would have that information, and basically they would give you the steps to generate the key, and they would configure that document or encrypted document using that specific rules. And you can generate the key using the same steps which they have provided, and then you use that key to validate it. So it comes under symmetric key sort of architecture.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, let's go on to with the blockchain architecture, right? Okay, let's talk about the first component, which are nodes. So what could be nodes in a network, right? The network could like anything which participates in some kind of network as a node. Like every participant in a network is a node. Like it could be a system, it could be a mobile phone, it could be your watch or whatever technological devices, right? Which we have. Any entity which participates in network is a node. There are different types of nodes here in blockchain architecture. We'll be discussing about each of these nodes. But one thing which is common about these nodes is the hardware specification, right? It should have some kind of space and memory to basically connect to that network and execute some kind of steps, right? So let's go over full nodes. So what full node does is it basically downloads the entire blockchain history. So let's say we are a small bank and we have 10 users, and 10 users are doing some kind of transactions, right? Like user 1 is sending a transaction to user 2, and user 2 is sending some kind of transaction to user 3. All these transaction history are stored in public ledger, right? Now, a full node is a node which should be able to download the entire history into its system, right? And enforce its rules, right? So in this case, it just needs the storage. And another important property of this full node is it should be able to support and provide security to the network. Like, let's say what happens in blockchain is basically whenever a new node comes in, right? Whenever there are new set of transaction, that the transaction needs to be converted to a block, and these blocks are added to a current set of transaction blocks, right? In that case, full nodes, since they have the entire history of the transactions, they should be able to validate and verify if new transactions are correct. If new transactions are correct, they would give an approval, and those transactions would get appended in the public ledger or the database which we are talking about, right? So those are the full nodes. Lightweight or partial nodes. These nodes are, let's say let's say we want to run that system in the mobile, right? We don't have that much storage. What this lightweight nodes do is they'll just get some kind of metadata from that from the system, and use that metadata to connect to the connect and get the full nodes data, right? And then use it for processing. In blockchain or in Bitcoin terms, it's used for simple wallet purposes. There are this minor nodes here in blockchain architecture. By minor, what the minor node, what it does is it's able to basically the exact task of miner is able to verify that if the new transactions are correct, and also provide so to do this verification, right, it has to do a lot of processing. So apart from storage, right, it would also have a good amount of processing power. So minor node is type of a full node, which basically has both storage and memory and processing power. So minor node, again, they classify into a solo miner or group or pool miners, in which solo miner is a single person or single system or single entity doing the mining. Groups are since mining is a costly process, what typically done is different entities or different people basically form a group, and then they use their system resources to basically mine and process the transaction. We'll be discussing about what mining means and in this context, but just consider it as some kind of a system which basically downloads the entire transaction history, takes a new transaction history, and then does some kind of computation within the networks to validate and approve the transaction, right? That's what miner does. Listening nodes or super nodes, what this nodes does is it is visible. It's just a visible full node. Like if any new node wants to get into the system, right, it communicates with that new node, just establishes the connection, and just gives the whole blockchain history or whole transaction history, right? It's just used for connection purposes. Listening nodes, right? These are the different kind of nodes in blockchain architecture. Let's go over another concept which is very important. So we'll be putting together all these concepts to build the blockchain architecture. So next we'll go over this hashing concept, right? What exactly is hashing? So hashing basically take any the process of hashing is we should take any arbitrary size data, right, and then we should be able to convert it to fixed length output. Let's say I have 120 length text, right, and when I pass it to this hashing function, it does some kind of computation, and it just gets me with some kind of fixed values. Let's say a size of 10 characters or 10 bits, whatever, right? Even if the document size increases like 1,000, 10,000, whatever size it is, like the final output after hashing is going to be of same size, right? So basically it maps any size data to a fixed size. Like consider an example of a hashing function in which like you have some kind of data X and you mod it with some kind of number N, right? In that case, this hashed value falls between this range 0 to n minus 1, right? This h of x is hash digest. What it does, it's the output of the hashing, like output when we get from hashing a data, right? So this is what a typical hash function means. And in terms of blockchain, there's something called cryptographically secure hash function, which are used in blockchain in building this blockchain architecture. So what, apart from this general hash function definition, right, what is cryptographically secure hash function, right? These have three very important properties. So the first property is it should be one way. Basically, given an input X, it should be easy to compute that it should be very easy to compute that hash output, which is the hash digest. And if I give you the hash digest h of x, right, with that, it should be literally impossible to calculate this x. It should be very, very hard. In fact, there should not be any deterministic algorithm to calculate this value, right? So this should be one way function. For two different values of x, right, the hash digest should be different. If in case the two values are same, then it's called hash collision, and there are ways to handle hash collisions, which we are not going to discuss in this architecture building. So in this, so basically we select hash function, which is one way, and which for two different input, it gives two different hash digests, maximum amount of time, right? And the third effect is avalanche effect. By avalanche effect, what we mean is, like, let's say we have this text, right, blockchain. Okay, if I give this input to a function hash function h, right, it will give me some value, let's say ABC, right? And if I just change one component, if I just change C to D right here, it should the output should be very different from the previous output. We should not be able to distinguish the difference. That is called avalanche effect. Like small change in data should reflect a larger change in the hashing output, is what this means. So typically for building blockchain architectures, cryptographically secure hash functions are used. Now these were used previously. So before blockchain, right, in 1991, Haber and Sonnet, right, they used it to timestamp digital documents, right? Let's say you have a document and multiple clients are using and updating the document, right? You want to track that document, like what people have done at what point of time, right? So in that case, what they use is they use a sequence of timestamps denoting when the document is created or edited. And whenever a client accesses a document, a new block is constructed with sequence ID, client ID, timestamp, and previous hash value. So let's look at this. So let's say client 1 accesses this document at timestamp 1, and it uses some kind of hash, right? In the next state, some other client to access the same document. In that case, what we do is we use the previous hash value here, right? And get this get the second output. And in third state, it will use the previous hash value, right? It builds a kind of relationship between the processing of the sequence, right? So this has been done around 1991 by Haber and Sonnet. So after this, we come to Merkle tree. So what Merkle tree? It's also kind of data structure used for hashing, right? In this, let's say we have 4 documents, right? Document 1, 2, 3, 4. And what it does is it takes hash of document 1, hash of document 2, and then it appends in its previous level, right? It just appends the hash of previous the next 2 levels. It does hashing from in a way like this, right? Every leaf node basically is so these are the leaf nodes, right? They contain the pure hash of the data, whatever is there, and all non-leaf node basically contain the hash of the labels of the child nodes, basically. That's what is Merkle tree. Again, Bayer, Haber, and Sonnet used this in 1992 to improve the efficiency of combining timestamp, right? So let's look at both of these, hash chaining architecture and Merkle tree architecture. Like, let's say if something changes in this document, right, this hash would change, and this hash would change, and the root hash would get changed, right? Like if anyone like we have 4 data in the database, and if someone makes minor change, like just changes one alphabet in this document, it is going to change this hash, and this would propagate through the level, and the final hash would get changed, right? Let's look at the difference. What exactly is the difference between these 2 hashing techniques and architecture? Let's say we have 4 documents, right? We were able to do this chaining, and we were able to do this chaining here with the 4 documents. Let's say we have 1,000 documents or 10,000 documents. Consider building this, right? It would take order of n, basically. It is linear, it scales linear, right? This kind of hashing algorithm to basically hash this, do kind of a hashing. And if you look at this, it's just logarithmic, right? In terms of processing, you take 2 documents, and then you keep building this tree upwards. So that's the reason Merkle tree is favored over this hash chaining approach. So So they basically the same scientists, they optimized it using a tree-based structure. Now let's talk about blocks in blockchain, right? Okay, so block can be thought. So before blocks, so any questions so far till Merkle tree? Okay, if not, I'll be going with this block architecture, right? Let's yeah, go ahead.
Previous slide, sir. Previous slide, 1 second. Sir.
Yeah.
Right, labeled with the hash of each node. Leaf node is labeled with the hash of a data block. The second point is different, right? Cryptographic hash. Hash and the cryptographic hash is different.
Hash and cryptographic hash is different. Yes.
So that's what I singled out.
Yeah, hash and cryptographic hash are different. So hash, basically what hashing means is just convert plain size data to a fixed size, right? Cryptographically secure hash would use all these properties, right? So yeah. So these are architectural patterns. You can even use cryptographically secured hash here. So that doesn't matter. So basically here the favored design is to use cryptographically secured hash function, basically satisfying all three properties here. The idea of this kind of architecture is to identify if someone has tampered the document. It's simple, like even if you make a minor change in document, we should be able to identify that there is some kind of change done to this document, right? Seeing this hash itself. So let's think something like this, like consider a peer-to-peer network like torrent, right? Let's say we want to download some kind of a software. Let's say I want to download Microsoft Word, right? Now peer-to-peer architecture, everyone has capacity to upload that installation file, right? Like even I can upload, or anyone all over the globe can basically upload the software, right? Let's consider like that. So what happens is, how do we verify that if someone's uploaded data is not malicious? What we do is we basically convert. The simplest technique here is to convert that whatever data you get, right? Basically get the hash of it and check the hash of the original installation file. If it matches, no data has been tampered, right? So that's why when we look at different software, right, there would always be a hash value provided with that software, basically to identify if someone has tampered that original installation suite or not. So just an example to support like how hashing can be used to identify changes in the data, right? Yeah. So let's go over blocks. So a block can be thought as a page in a ledger, so or a record book. So here let's think block as a database, right? Or a data, something which something similar to database. It just stores data. All it does is stores data, blocks, right? Now blockchain is a sequence of blocks, and it's connected using some kind of all these architecture we discussed, right? Hashing and Merkle tree architectures. It's connected with each other, and every peer in blockchain network maintains a local copy of this blockchain. So let's say there are 10, let's say we have some around 300 transactions, right? Block 1 will contain first 100 transactions. Block 2 might contain the next 100. Block 3 might have the final 100, right? In that case, basically it just stores a sequence of data. It's something like database, but we keep appending the data, so that now this whole block is visible to all parties in the network. Let's say there are 1,000 nodes in network. 1,000 nodes would be able to see like all these blockchain, like block 1 had transaction from 1 to 100, block 2 had transaction from 100 to 200. Like all parties in the network would be able to view this block. Now all these blocks are connected using the hash value, right? Like we'll be discussing about the detailed architecture of how or what are the components inside the block. But for now, well, let's think that all these blocks are like connected to each other with a previous hash value of each of these blocks. Now these blocks, as I said, would contain a list of transactions, right? let's say we have 100 or 500 transactions, like 100 transactions here. Now, how do we store the hash value of all these transactions? Is it feasible to convert hash for each of these transactions and then again get a single hash, or is it like take all of these as a single block and calculate the blocks hash and store it here? The second strategy is better because let's say we have 100 transactions, right? We can use this Merkle tree algorithm, right? Like we can use like all transactions from transaction 1 to 100, and then we can group in logarithmic time and calculate this hash and then store that hash value here. So all these transactions basically are converted to a single hash and they are stored in the block. Now let us look at the block. So that apart from that, the block might have some kind of size constraints, like you should they can limit like each block can have only 500 transactions or can have an average size of 1 MB. Like in the initial paper they have given it as 1 MB, but I think it has improved or increased sufficiently lot. This is just an example purpose. Like you can restrict the block size, you can have size limits, and that is for a reason. This is for a reason to prevent different attacks in blockchain, different cyber or hacking attacks, right? In the blockchain network. So you can restrict and have limitations on size. So one thing is larger blocks can help processing large number of transactions, right? Let's say there are 10 parties in the network and there are some 100 transactions which are happened. If I take each transaction, single transaction at a time, and if I try to verify it, it's going to take time, right? The best idea is to take all transactions over a period of time, convert them into a block, and then process it process it together. So right, in that case, larger blocks can help us process large number of transactions at single time. That is basically these are some characteristics. And let's go over the block components. So basically, a block would contain a block header and block body. So the block body contains the data, right? All the transactions in this case, right? In case of bitcoins, right? It can contain any data, right? It can contain healthcare data for healthcare domain. It can contain retail data for retail domain. But if you think about crypto coins, right? The bitcoins, right? It contains the information, primarily this information, right, from to a number of coins. Like let's say people would be transacting doing some different transactions, right? They would be either sending some kind of coins or receiving some kind of coins, right? It would be primarily from to a number of coins here in case of Bitcoin. And these are basically digitally signed and encrypted by verified peers. Like let's say X in a network, blockchain network wants to send some kind of some amount of bitcoins to Y, then it would do all the cryptographic mechanism, right? Digital signing and encryption, like we have discussed before, and then it would get transferred to a corresponding PS, right? So this ensures the security and the integrity, all the security aspects which we spoke. So basically, the block body only contains the data, and the block header contains this is very important. It contains basically the metadata of the block. Now, what all metadata? It contains the previous block hash. It contains the Merkle root. Merkle root basically is generated by using a set of transaction, right, in the block body. And there is something called mining stats, and it would contain the version and timestamp as when this block has been appended to the network or created to this network, right? So block header typically contains all these parameters: timestamp, version, Merkle root, difficulty target, nouns, and previous hash. So while discussing mining concept, we'll discuss about difficulty target, nouns, right? Rest all should be clear. Like timestamp is at what time this block is created and added to the network. Version is there are different versions of blockchain architectures, right? Version one is like public, version 2 is like private, right? So we'll be discussing there could be different version. Merkle root is basically the cryptographically hashed values from these transactions or the data which are there in the block body. And previous hash is the block value of the previous block's hash value. So this is what a block header contains. So this is how a block header is linked to the next block, right? the previous hash is basically linked to the block's current hash, and this is how it is linked to be detailed. And yeah, so let's look at mining mechanism and how what is the mining logic, how it ensures security, and all these concepts from now. So any questions still here? Like,
Previous slide, sir. Previous slide.
yes.
Block. Yes. Yeah. Please, 1 second, sir. I'll just. Okay. Block header, previous hash, Merkle root, all those things is there in each and every block, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is how it's connected. So basically, the previous hash would with previous hash it would point to the current block hash, and then previous hash would again plug. So this is how they link each of these blocks. Right?
It is not connected forwardly. It's a backward connection. Yeah, showing this arrow mark showing that. What does
No,
it
that's
mean?
just the architecture. If so, in this case, right, this block was generated first, and this is getting generated next, right?
Okay, like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Apart from that, any questions? So if not, we can discuss about the blockchain architecture and about the mining logic, the how the Bitcoin mining logic works. So we can go.
So in the previous slide, why was it from right to left? Any specific reason?
No, it's not. It's just some figure. Like let's consider this block was generated first. It can be right to left or left to right. Right? Just the pointer which matters. So from this pointer, what we can identify is this block was created first, and then this block uses the previous.
Is there any special meaning for that?
No meaning at all. It's just a representation, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it looks like a very unique, representation. Unlike left to right, it is right to left.
Is it so? It doesn't have any specific representation as far as I know. It's just a kind of link which connects different blocks, right? Let's say this block right here. In all these diagrams, it's specified from left to right. There is no specific, like you can specify from right to left also, but it's just basically the links here, like how they connect one block of transactions to the next block, right?
Yeah, all the blocks are connected sequentially.
Yeah, and they are connected sequentially. Yes, like any more questions on this?
Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Go ahead.
See, I had a doubt, like, what is the exact difference between a ciphertext and a hash?
Oh, ciphertext and hash, right?
Yeah.
A good question. So, what hash does is it converts any.
It can be reversed, but the hash function cannot be reversed. I think so. Is it correct, sir?
Ciphertext can be reversed. You can take it like that until you have that key, right? And until you have that key, you can get the, like, let's say we have some kind of data, we encrypt it and convert it to ciphertext.
Yes. The main
And if you have the key, it is reversible. But hash is irreversible. Like it's like once it's converted, it's very hard to find the previous like from what it is. Yeah. You're breaking. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I didn't get the point.
Okay, so what I was saying is hash is something which converts fixed length input to fixed length output, right? Arbitrary length input to fixed length output, right? Ciphertext might vary. That is first different. Second is it is reversible given the key. Like if you have that key, right, you can get the data from the key. In hash, getting that data is very difficult. There is there is no deterministic algorithm to basically convert. It depends on the hash function too. But for cryptographically secure hash function is not reversible.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we can go the mining logic. So what mining is? Mining is basically a mechanism to generate hash, right? Given some kind of hints, right? Again, so what happens is like we have a series of network, we have a series of nodes in the network, and each node is like decentralized, and each node has its own control, right? Now, when there is a so now we have also with these nodes we have set of blocks which has already a set of transactions. Let's say we have some 3 blocks with some 300 transactions, and there are some new transactions which are happened, right? Now what this miners do is they'll take this new transaction, they will try to verify it with the existing transaction, and once they verify, right, and then they would be able to add that transactions to the existing network, right? So it's a process of basically validating the input, right? So how it is done is each node in the network is given as some kind of a cryptographic puzzle, and what this puzzle is we'll discuss in some time. But so each node, let's say a network has 10 nodes, right? All these 10 nodes are given some kind of a cryptographic puzzle, and whichever node solves that puzzle, right, and that node would be able to basically add the existing transactions to the so that node would basically first send out a notification like it has solved that puzzle with the existing transaction. Once that is done, the remaining nodes will validate the transaction. Once that validation is done, the existing transactions or the transaction which have been validated would get created to a next block, and it would get appended to the existing ledger. So that's how this process works on high level. Mining is a process of basically validating new transaction and adding it as a block to the existing data or the ledger which we have in simple terms. So let's look at the Bitcoin mining logic, right? What happens in Bitcoin mining logic is they give us HK and like HK, which is hash, which is some number of prefix, and they give us the previous hash, the current transaction, and nouns, right? The idea here is we need to find the nouns here given certain value of HK, right? Where this could be a certain number of prefix or certain number of zeros in the prefix, right? So to explain in simple terms, for the current node, we have the previous node's hash, right? And we have a list of transactions which needs to be added. And the problem would be given, the problem that is given to each and every node in the network is, okay, I append some number of zeros in the prefix and find the noun, for what nouns does this hash would append 6 zeros or 7 zeros in front of the hash, right? So that is a mining logic which is given. This is not an easy problem. This is a tough problem, but not an impossible problem. So this is typically solved by using brute force. There is no pattern sort of a logic to determine this, since we are using a cryptographically secure hash, right? So the only way we could find this is using brute force, and for that a lot of computational power is required. That's why mining would take like a lot of computational power in finding this HK. Once that is found, right, for what nouns values we are able to identify this prefix, we'll pass these values to the network, and all these network, it's easy to validate, right? Since the given transactions, right, we would have all the public keys here, right? Based on that, it would get validated, and all these would get appended to the existing new node would get created, and it would get appended to the existing blockchain architecture, right? So typically the mining stats includes the timestamp, difficulty, and the nonce, right? So the difficulty which is specified, the difficulty is specified by the network.
Nonce, N-O-N or N-O-U-N, sir?
I don't know. I think it's N-O-N. You have to
N-O-N,
verify.
I think so.
Yeah, N-O-N, right? I think.
What does it mean? Non means
It's some kind of like, let's say so let's say I'm giving you some kind of constraints, right? Point to prime numbers with some kind of difference would get me some kind of a different would get me a different product, right? With what difference I can get that. So it's very simple. Like we have a previous hash value, and we give the output should have some number of zeros with the final result, right? For what value of this hash and the nonce and the existing transaction would give me n number of zeros in the prefix. Yeah, so that's
number that can be used once.
Yeah, so that's how this Bitcoin mining logic work. The mining stats is basically timestamp and difficulty. This difficulty, they keep increasing it over the period of time, which automatically, like initially for mining, they specify like how much. So they keep increasing the number of prefix, or they keep playing with the prefix parameter to basically control this mining difficulty and mining complexity. That's how this mining logic works. So overall, the headers basically they connect the transactions using a Merkle. So these transactions from the body are converted to Merkle hash, and headers connect them. And any change in transaction will result in a change in the block header, and any change in this header would result in the change in the subsequent blocks in the chain. Thus, what happens because of this is if an attacker tries to change some kind of transaction in this network, right, he has to change the entire chain of blocks in the network, which is very difficult task, right? For finding and validating only appending one block itself, we require like a huge amount of computational complexity. After this, we have to change each of the other nodes in the or other blocks in the network, which is very not impossible, but very difficult using the current system architecture and system power constraints which we have, right? So that's the overall view of how blocks works. So what happens once a block is verified? It's just added to the blockchain, and once it's added to the blockchain, now the chain needs to be updated to all other nodes in the network, right? Since it's distributed, decentralized, and each node should have same replica of the updated blockchain, right? In that case, all these replica are updated and made consistent. Now there is a challenge, like how are they made consistent, right? Here, this consistency, to making that consistency, we would go into something called consensus algorithms. So we look at the consensus algorithms, different consensus algorithms. So the idea here is what this consensus algorithm does is it ensures that different nodes in network see the same data at same point of time. So let's say there are three existing blocks. After this mining logic, we appended another block, so it became 4 in one particular node. Now this block would show up consistent across all other nodes in the network. So this consensus algorithm basically ensures that all the nodes in the network see the same data at same time, right? Now there are different challenges here. So how to achieve this consensus if the network is very large and we don't know the participant in the network, right? If we know, if we are able to verify the participants in the network, right? Let's say if we know that the participants in the network are people from a group of companies, right? We can directly send some kind of a message passing algorithms, right? And get it validated. But how are we going to validate or how are we going to get this consensus if the network is if we don't know the participants, or if we are not able to validate the participants in the network, right? So here they pose this challenge response mechanism, which is what we discussed here, right? The network will pose a challenge, and each node would attempt to solve a challenge, and in that ways different nodes right and different nodes would win at different point of time, right? So they will make that work in such a way that the one who solves the challenge would be able to append this node, right? This is called proof of work algorithm in blockchain, basically Bitcoin terms, right? Bitcoin uses proof of work based consensus algorithm. There are different other consensus algorithms, so we'll be discussing about that shortly. So this is how basic blockchain works. A transaction is requested, and that transaction, what happens is so when a series of transactions is requested, a block is created. Once the block is created, the block basically is sent to every node in the network, and it is validated using the proof of work algorithm. And once it's validated using the miners and proof of work algorithm, right, the node who solves the cryptographic puzzle will receive some rewards, and then the block gets added, and then the transaction gets complete. So this is how typical blockchain flow works overall, using these architectural parameters which we have gone over so far. So let's look at different types of blockchain architecture. So there are three main types of blockchain architecture, right? One is public, private, and constrained, or basically federated blockchain architecture. So public blockchain architecture means like the data and access to the system is available to anyone, and you don't need verification of the participants. Like anyone would be able to participate in that network. It's completely an open system, right? An example could be Bitcoin, all these Bitcoin, Ethereum architectures, right? Private blockchain architecture is basically, you want to implement this some kind of a decentralized based architecture, but it is constrained within a private entity or private company or organization, right? It is controlled by a specific organization. In that case, it is called private blockchain architecture. In constrained architecture, there is no one private organization. There will be a group of organization which will basically implement this architectures, and they will have their own separate set of procedures which are controlled, and they might impose some different restrictions on the architecture. So these are the three main types of blockchain architecture. So yeah, so if you look at the different properties, right? Consensus determination, how would you ensure consensus, right? In public blockchain, basically in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all these cryptocurrencies, we use this concept of miners. Basically, this miners would solve that cryptographic puzzle, and whichever solves the puzzle would basically send out those results across all the nodes to get verified and then append it to the network. This is how the consensus determination is done in public blockchain. In constrained blockchain, there are selected set of nodes, right? So if 4 or 5 different organizations are involved in solving some kind of a problem, they would select a certain kind of nodes specific to their own architecture. So it's not, there's no concept of miners. They might have specific set of leader nodes or some kind of a priority nodes in case the constrained blockchain. And that is same with the kind of a private blockchain, right? Since it's within organization, the organization could control that. So the read permission here is public. basically anyone would be able to enter this network. You just need to have some kind of computation power and RAM, and everything should be fine. Here it could be public or restricted, because they could, like, there could be some data like which they could keep it as public. Like let's say we are building some kind of a supply chain management system, right? In that case, if I want some 10 orders of some kind of a product, right, that they might have, they can keep that public, but all the transaction details, they could keep it as restricted within their network, right? So in that case, they have the freedom, they can keep it as public or restricted in both of these public, private and constrained network. Immutability level, it is almost impossible to tamper with public blockchain, because one node you have to change all the other node, right? Like, and since it's a public blockchain, the size of the network is very huge, and also the it ensures this the consensus mechanism, like proof of work, right? It uses proof of work as consensus mechanism, which is very tough to break, right? It requires a lot of power and processing resources to basically break that. So it's very difficult to tamper. In case of Consortium private blockchain, it could be tampered, because the control is, or the it is given to only a specific set of users, right? So, and the network is also small, so there are chances that it could get tampered. Apart from that, we use, the efficiency here is low, because we tend to use a lot of resources. Here we are basically using it specifically for a problem, so it's like we are using it more efficiently. Centralization, we don't have centralization here. It's completely decentralized. Per Constream, they can have partial centralization, right? Because since there are a group of parties involved, they can have one of them as leader. They can either have partial, or they can have no centralization, right? So in that case, they might have to assign equal rights to each of these entities participating in this Constream blockchain, right? So here you can have that partial centralization, but private, it's just controlled by one entity. So when you have a control with one hand, like one entity or one type of system, right, it's centralized. Here consensus is permissionless, basically, but here it needs permission, right? It needs to identify leaders. So there are different consensus algorithms which private and Consortium algorithms blockchain use, and what public blockchain use. We'll be going over that next, right? So public blockchain. So this, if you have discussed here, right, it's mostly for open environment over a large network of participants. The user do not need to identify peers, hence users don't reveal the identity. And in this case, longest chain is accepted. So what happens is, like, first block is created, and then, like, consider this as timestamp 1, this as timestamp 2, timestamp 3, timestamp 4, right? In the first timestamp, this block 1 is created. In the second timestamp, multiple miners, 2 of these miners were able to solve the cryptographic puzzle, and in that case, both these block 3 and block 2 were appended. Then at timestamp 3, 3 different miners were able to solve the puzzle, and all these were appended, right? All these transactions were appended. At timestamp 4, only 1 miner was able to solve, and then it get appended, right? So only the longest chain in the network is preferred. So when this is sent, so this this transaction history, if it's sent across all nodes, right, it would prefer the longest part, and all the shortest parts would be forked or removed, like completely from the network. So that's how a public blockchain basically works. So there are some properties of consensus algorithms, and so we will be going over all the different consensus algorithms next. Like, before that, any questions on the previous part?
I think there is no more doubts.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah, I'll go over that. Give me 2 minutes. I'll start. Like we can start. Okay, so we will be discussing about the consensus algorithm, which is another important part of a blockchain architecture, and it is one of the important mechanisms which every blockchain architectures has. So yeah. Uh, Okay, so let's discuss about what consensus are and what are its properties, why it's used, right? So basically, it's a process like whenever we or the network solves some kind of problem or wants to add some kind of a node, some kind of block to the blockchain, right? It needs to get verified and it needs to be in common agreement, right? With like all the parties in the network should agree agree with this change, and all the complete appended node should get reflected to all these nodes at a single point of time, right? So that is called consensus mechanism. Why do we need this? To ensure reliability and fault tolerance in distributed system. So by reliability, let's say if there are n nodes in a network, and if one node is a malicious node, right? If that node gives up different decisions, conflicting decisions in the network, right? In that case, different certain part of the network might get a different results, but there should be a mechanism to ensure which of these is reliable, which of these results are reliable, and then it should make the system more reliable, and there should be a way to identify different faults in the distributed system, right? So basically, this concept has been there for long in traditional distributed architectures also. So so that's the basic idea of consensus. So that can be different faults which could happen in your network, right? There could be a crash fault. By crash fault, what I mean is a node could get completely crashed. In that case, the node might not be able to send or validate the results, right? That is called crash faults. Network or partition faults is something like a fault in a link or nodes which could result in like which could completely disconnect the network. Let's say we have something like this. Okay, like this, right? What happens if I have some kind of failure in this link? It would basically disconnect this network, right? So that is called basically yeah, so that is basically a network or a partition fault. And there is Byzantine fault. Byzantine faults are more difficult and difficult to handle in real time. So what Byzantine faults are? A node in a network, it might send one decision to one part of the network and other decision to other part. Let's say this would send, okay, accept this transaction to this node which is connected to left, and if another node, it might send a like reject this transaction, right? So these are two conflicting decisions which are being sent by this node. So these kind of faults is called Byzantine faults. So there are different properties which a consensus algorithm should have in general. So these are the four properties which a consensus algorithm basically should have. So it should have this termination criteria, like every correct individual should be able to decide some value at the end of consensus protocol. Like let's say if a network has some 5 or 6 correct individuals, right, and they all predict some kind of values, so they all should be able to consolidate and come to an end that, okay, this we are going to accept this transaction or we are going to reject the transaction. That should be a clear cut termination in that. There should be we should be able to validate there should be this validity property, like if all individuals like in the network are giving us same value, right? If let's say if network has some kind of individuals and all of them give the same value, then all correct individuals might decide on that value. That is called validity. And integrity, every correct individual might decide on at most one value. Like this is what we were talking about Byzantine faults, right? We could have conflicting like a node could give conflicting decisions at different part of the network, right? And agreement is like every correct individual must have like if the node is not not a Byzantine node or something like that, right? It might have agree on the same correct value. So these are the four basic properties of consensus algorithm. So the like while designing consensus algorithm, these properties needs to be ensured. And so there is this synchronous versus asynchronous message passing, which is like kind of used for consensus in distributed system earlier. So in synchronous strategy, what it does is there are set of nodes, and each node for validation would send their values to each other nodes, and they would wait for a certain amount of time, let's say 10 seconds. Each node would wait for 10 seconds to get results from all the nodes. And once that all these results are got, they use these results to consolidate and get a output. In that case, they are bounded by time. Synchronous. Asynchronous is they just allow the message, they just pass the messages, and they don't wait for the consensus to be done. So they could be like they could do the consensus later, or they could use some kind of a different metric to consolidate the results. So that's the difference between the synchronous and asynchronous message passing. Let's look at different kind of consensus algorithms and which are used, right? One is proof of work, which we have discussed already. The central idea behind this algorithm is to solve the complex mathematical puzzle, which is that hash, right? Identifying the nonce, basically, and then give out a solution that is easily verifiable. So finding that nonce is the difficult problem, which miners would compute. Once the nonce is found, verification is very easy, right? You just have to calculate that value based on or backtrace and calculate it, which is very easy, right? That's how this proof of work algorithm works. So the key here in this proof of work algorithm is so what this consensus mechanism, like a node would only be able to append or add some kind of a value to this blockchain ledger if it is a legitimate node, right? And this proof of work would require a lot of computational power to process this process and get the output, right? Let's say, why would a malicious node basically do this amount of computation or use or spend this amount of money to basically do this consensus, right? In that case, they ensure that this node is not basically malicious, and also it solves the puzzle, right? That's called proof of work. Proof of stake, basically, proof of work is used in Bitcoins. Proof of stake is a different concept. It's used in Ethereum based architecture. So here the idea of so since computational resources or computational power is too high or it's too difficult to get, right? And so why not use a proof of stake, right? What proof of stake does is so in this case, a system with a lot of power would win that consensus, right? Would be able to add that new block to the existing blockchain, and while adding this blockchain, they will also get some kind of reward, right? The reward could be some kind of bitcoins, right? If you consider Bitcoin, it was initially some 50 bitcoins, then it reduced to 25, and so it kept on reducing those rewards, right? That's how this proof of work mechanism works. So instead of spending or making the system spend so much of computational power, why not use a proof of stake? In proof of stake, what typically is done is, instead of investing on expensive hardware to solve complex puzzle, invest in the coin itself, invest in the architecture or the system itself. So in this case, what happens is only the system which has highest stake would win and would be able to append that and validate that new node into the existing blockchain. So here for proof of stake, what happens is, let's say it would purchase some coins like Ethereum, right? When we use Ethereum, we have to basically purchase some kind of stake, like some amount of coins from that Ethereum this thing, and then we need to use that coin to basically basically again use it to basically validate, and based on your validation and the coins and the amount of stake you have, your solution would be accepted or rejected. So that's how proof of stake works. Proof of capacity, so instead of using computational power here, they use space. Basically the one who has more space would win the consensus algorithm. And proof of deposit, in this case what you do is you invest in some amount of money basically to basically do the consensus, right? But still there are some other drawbacks of this public blockchain, right? And this consensus kind of an architecture, right? So there's something called 51% attack. What happens here is, in a public blockchain, right? Let's say we have 10 nodes. Out of this, if you are able to, if there are 6 malicious nodes, right? Then it would be easy for those nodes to control the entire blockchain architecture, right? It would be able to change the entire block values, right? Since the majority is malicious node. So this is called 51% attack. Right? This is typically slow because there is some amount of time which is spent in validation and getting this approved, right? There are wastage of resources again, like we are wasting a lot of space, computational power, all those things. Again, there is the security and privacy issues. This is primarily for the public blockchain, right? In case of only, this is only for public blockchain. In case of only public blockchain, what happens is we don't validate the users, and also each of these data are publicly available, though they are encrypted using some format, but they are all publicly available in the blockchain, right? So there is some kind of a security compromise, not a big factor though. And there are 2 major attacks which are predominant and which people have tried to basically compromise this system. One is Sybil attack and second is DDoS attack. So what attackers do in Sybil attack is they attempt to fill the network with the clients under their control. So let's say we have some network, right? The blockchain network here, and a node, basically an attacker node, would basically do some computation. It would append itself with the existing node, and what this node would have multiple connections with other nodes in its network. In that case, this would try to add more nodes here and get the entire control of this network and try this 51% attack after that. So in that case, there are things which people have done to prevent that. What they do is they don't allow multiple nodes from same IP and all those things, right? The second attack is DDoS attack. DDoS attack, what they do is they exhaust the resource. Like they try to push more transactions into the block. So in that case, there are limitations, like the size of block is fixed. All the longest chain is preferred, and those blocks which are not in the chain would basically be removed. So all these processes are followed to eliminate these DDoS and Sybil attack. So we'll be discussing about private blockchain now, or permissioned architecture. So in this case, users are authenticated. So in public, the users are not authenticated. We don't know their public information. So we use this harsh mining algorithm, right? Proof of work or proof of stake to basically use and do a lot of computation, right? In this case, we know the resources are from like they are authenticated. Like let's say we are implementing this architecture within a company, right, for a specific problem. In that case, the company controls, like, okay, all these are employees of this company, right? So they are authenticated a priori before that. So in that case, we don't need such kind of a complex processing consensus algorithm here. But here the thing is, though the users may know each other, however, the users may not trust each other. So what happens is, users, we do have an idea that they are authenticated and they are within the network and they are within the organization, but they might be solving a conflicting problem and they might not trust each other. And there could be multiple teams within an organization, and each team would have only a specific set of private data which they might want to keep it within their team instead of giving it to secondary teams, right? So in that case, this is preferred. Security and consensus is still required here. Some example is smart contracts and proven tracking of assets. Smart contracts, as I've discussed, right? Let's say we are like, let's consider this Flipkart type of a Flipkart or Amazon type of a supply chain, right? Like someone would order something, and then that order would go to a vendor, and then vendor would process that order, then it goes to a distributor. Each of these levels we have some kind of a commission involved, right? So when we pay something, or when we order something, these smart contracts are set of rules. Basically they ensure how this processing needs to be done. And proven tracking of assets is basically, suppose you are sending some kind of an asset, like same used in supply chain mechanism. Like if you're sending some kind of an asset or some kind of a product, right, you need to track like where and what all entities that are going through. So it's also used in these kind of applications. So consensus here is state machine replication based. So by state machine replication based is, so look at smart contracts, right? They're state based. Like initial, the state is money paid to the organization, right? And then this organization initiated an order to a vendor, right? And then vendor started processing the order. In processing the order, it might get different raw material from different other clients. So this is a sequence of steps, right? These sequence of steps can be represented as a state machine now, right? Like it goes to a first state one, and then goes to a state two, and then again comes to, so it can be modeled as a state machine. And so state machine based consensus algorithms are used. These has been there for long, like it has been there historically in distributed systems also. So the idea behind state machine based replication consensus is each node will have the set of states. Like let's say we have some kind of smart contract, right, which goes to 3 states: state 1, state 2, and state 3, right? And there are 10 nodes in the network. Each of these 10 nodes will have the state machine replication. Like it will have like state 1, state 2, state 3, and all these nodes would have the same state. Once a transaction is done, right, each node would process this transaction separately. And once the transaction is done, then they all coordinate and come to a final conclusion based on this result. That's how a state machine based replication consensus work in the system. So why do we use state machine based replication consensus? One is like, the users already. So we know the users already. So in that case, their states are going to be same mostly. So in that case, you can directly replicate the state. Second is avoid the overhead of mining. Mining is a costly process. It takes time, resources. So we want to avoid that. And that's the reason why we use state machine based consensus for permission network. So here also we have crash or network faults and Byzantine faults. And there are different algorithms like Paxos and Raft, which are primarily used for handling crash and network faults. What Paxos does is it has this architecture of proposer, acceptor, and learner form. So consider this as a let's say we are a group of people, and we want to decide we like tea or we like coffee, right? In that case, what happens is there should be only one final decision, either tea or coffee. So 10 people in that group, right, so each person in this group would wait for some kind of a response from other people. If they don't get response, right, each would become a proposer. Like let's say I wait for some amount of time, and if none of my friends or none of my group mates have suggested something, I would start proposing, like, okay, we'll go for tea. In that same case, each of the other people might propose a different value, or some subset of nodes would propose a certain value. Once that is done, the remaining nodes, once something is proposed, right, now there could be multiple proposers. And once this something has been proposed, there are different nodes who didn't propose, but they would accept it. Okay, so as people are suggesting coffee, then some other people might accept, okay, I'll also go for coffee. In the end, what happens is the results are consolidated and majority vote is taken, and those is used as a priority here. And how does it eliminate this crash faults? Like let's say one node crashes, right? It is not able to participate in this decision making process. In that case, what happens is the majority wins anyways, right? So in that case, this algorithm works well. Raft is basically an advanced, I'd say, a modification of Paxos in simple terms. So I think there are subsequent sessions which explains this consensus algorithms in detail. I'm just going over from higher end. So what this Raft does is, since the problem with Paxos is there could be multiple proposers, right? If there are n proposers proposing a kind of a solution, that could be a problematic, right? In this Raft, it's kind of a leader election. All the members in the network would basically select a leader, and then the leader would send out a decision, and then this decision is either accepted or rejected by different nodes, and then overall the final decision is calculated based on some kind of voting. That's Raft. Byzantine fault tolerance is similar to Raft, again with some kind of a large amount of constraints within that. So that's how a private blockchain works. Now this is the last architecture. So there's something, this technology, I mean, this there is this concept of hyperledger here in blockchain space, I would say. This is not a blockchain, this is not a Bitcoin, this is a kind of a project, an open source collaborative project. What this hyperledger does is it builds tools and frameworks with which we can build some kind of applications, blockchain or decentralized applications to solve problems, right? And this is hosted by Linux Foundations, which is again open source. So Hyperledger is basically a platform or set of tools with which we can build distributed or decentralized applications like Bitcoin based, or like for supply chain or for different industrial applications. So how this works on high level, this would be, let's say we have some kind of a smart contract, right? Like a smart contract could be a supply chain problem, right? Let's consider this ordering products, right? Like someone orders a product and it goes through a series of levels and you receive that order, right? And all these rules are configured here in smart contract. So there is a front-end application. So what this blockchain developer does is he develops this client application, and this client is a front end. This uses SDK, and which basically connects to the smart contracts, and it also has access to this different blocks in blockchain. So once there is a concept of world state. So what this world state is basically stores the most recent state of the smart contract or the output of the transaction. So it is stored in traditional database. You can consider this as a traditional database, example, a key value sort of a database. And it's like data elements can be added, deleted, and all these traditional database works could be done. It just maintains a recent state of the smart contracts. And as we know, like smart contracts is basically a set of rules which are specified to execute a problem. Blockchain here is again the same linked list sort of an architecture, the hash chain, which connects multiple blocks, and each block has the transactions as we have discussed. And these blocks are immutable and it's difficult to tamper, right? And once this smart contracts are each step of the smart contracts is done, then it emits some kind of a event which says, okay, your first step is done, your order is placed. Second, you like, okay, this has been distributed, and then distributed started. This has been sent. The order has been sent for sent to some kind of a vendor. Then it would emit some kind of an event, right? At each step, this is kind of a notification sort of a thing which does, and this is just for one peer, right? There could be multiple peers, like kind of a network here, and that's how Hyperledger works. And that's all for blockchain architectures. And yeah, so any more FAQs on this? So apart from this, like I would like to see, like, so blockchain is a very disruptive technology, I would say. From knowledge perspective, it is in its nascent stage, and there are a lot of companies, startups, which I see in Silicon Valley here, and they try to solve a lot of problems. It's a very disruptive technology. Though even being an AI person, right? When I see blockchain as a technology, there are immense scope. And like it's a good area to explore, is what I would suggest. Yeah.
Like you explained about Hyperledger, right?
Yes.
Sir, in Hyperledger, like it is like decentralized or it is like a centralized one? Because like Hyperledger means like right now IBM Foundation is working on it.
Mm-hmm.
IBM Foundation is working on Hyperledger, right?
Yes.
Yeah, how to access I like how to work on like if it is like any how to create a wallet in Hyperledger like that. Any ideas, sir?
Yes, so there are different I can share you a few links for that. Like
Okay, sir.
there are ways and there are scripts where you can be a blockchain developer. You can go practically implement that and see how these are built. So that's more on the coding front to be true. Yeah.
Certainly, like how will be sharing these links, sir? Like whether through Madam or
Yeah, I can forward
I
it to.
will get it and I will share it.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, sir. Because like decentralized, like many security issues are there, right? Right now, only Hyperledger is good, right? Good
Yeah,
platform to
it
work
is.
on decentralized.
Yeah, true. It is very good. It is very good in building application. I have built simple applications. I can send it to you
Okay,
for my
sir.
testing purpose. Basically, I tried using them once in a while, so I could send that to you if that is the case. But yeah, these are good areas to explore. And
Okay, sir.
yeah, people are combining blockchain with different technologies, right? There is something called.
Yes, sir. Recently, Metaverse also is going to. Facebook is developing games. Those things and all is happening in these things.
Yeah, yeah. So it is combined with multiple other technologies. If you consider both from industry perspective and from research perspective, right? Blockchain is a very promising technology. It is in name and it is in its starting phase, so there are some kind of security issues, processing issues, but it has a very good scope, right? With this decentralization, all these things.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is this concept, something called decentralized AI, which people do. So let's consider there are three self-driving cars, right? And you are at a three centered road, right? If all these three self-driving car comes very close, they should make a decision. Now they cannot go talk to a centralized system or like a map or something to decide, right? It might take some time,
A
and then
spontaneous reaction should be there.
yeah, spontaneous reaction should be there. In that case, if you have this blockchain sort of a decentralized architecture within that agents, right? In that case, you would be able to react faster. But there are also disadvantages or downside. Let's say you build some kind of an AI system which generates music, right? Good music based on some songs, and you make it decentralized. What would happen is uh, it would generate music, it would sell it on Play Store, and again it would use that money to create or build resources to create more music, and then again you get sell it, get more money, develop resources. So it will be a never ending cycle, and that agent might become very rich, like who knows. So that's how, like, so there are downsides also, but um, yeah, so it's a promise.
Right now, which company is working in decentralized AI combinations, sir?
A
Any?
lot of companies here, they try to, like, all of these are startups here at California, so they basically try different strategies. They they uh, like they like they are not very well known, I would say. And they also apply this mining, right? Like, there are startups which try to simplify this mining process using a distributed sort of a thing, and applying AI to basically route like they basically trace what or which part of network, or what kind of power consumptions should I use to basically mine faster. So there are different things they are trying. So yeah, there are a
Okay,
lot of
sir.
companies you should basically look.
Yes, sir. I will research in this thing. If it is anything, means I can contact you, right, sir?
Yeah, sure, you can contact me.
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Dinesh sir, you can unmute your mic and you can raise your question.
Okay.
No questions, sir, but it's very nice session. Your presentation was good.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, Praveen sir, for the session. We came to understand the basic decentralization process as well as the blockchain architecture and the consensus algorithms and all. Thank you for the session.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir.
So thank you so much, Praveen, for taking so much effort, because the time at your point is around 3 a.m. I think, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
it was
fine.
more informative session. So let us have one photograph. So all participants, can you switch on your video for a moment? Praveen, can you switch on your video?
Are you able to hear me? I'm having network issues.
Can you switch on your video, Praveen, for a moment?
Yes. Yes.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
So again, tomorrow we will meet around 9 o'clock. We will discuss on topics like Hyperledger Fabric and how to build blockchain on Hyperledger Fabric. And we will have some hands-on session on how to create smart contracts.
Ma'am, can we fill the form tomorrow? Because I'm riding car and mobile I cannot do now, unable to do.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Just remind me to send the link.
Okay, madam. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, everyone.